The following video contains spoilers up to the Dawntrail storyline completion of patch 7.3, as well as lots of speculation as to what's next in the storyline and eventual content for Final Fantasy XIV's 8.0 expansion, scheduled to release sometime maybe in 2027 or late 2026. A lot of the information is based on Encyclopaedia Eorzea entries, in-game entries on passing NPC dialogue, including things that the producer and director and many other members of the Square Enix team have said before. So with that being said, let's get speculating. A lot of people are asking what is going to come next, what lies beyond the horizon of Dawntrail. Well, a lot of people, including myself, are starting to speculate as to the waters north of Othard, which of course Othard featured very heavily in Stormblood and introduced us to the various Zayla tribes and other inhabitants of those lands, including that of the Far East just to the east of Othard, with that of Hingashi and Kugane, and basically Stormblood had a two-tiered storyline flipping between the two areas. And we know very little about the north area of the world, right? The frozen north in amongst that of the big oceans. So let's recap what we do know about the actual game and if in fact Blindfrost is the location for 8.0. Blindfrost then is an ocean north of Othard, bordering the chilling reaches near Ilzabad. The sea is constantly blanketed with storms and ice, with no trade routes or safe passage known to exist. This is something we know from the Encyclopaedia Eorzea. If we hark back to Emmett Selk's cryptic words at the end of Endwalker,
"Tell me, have you been to the ruins beneath the waters of the Bounty? Or the treasure islands beyond the frozen waters of Blindfrost in Othard's north?"
he mentions, quote, "the treasure islands beyond the frozen waters of Blindfrost," end quote, as one of the several untouched frontiers that the Warrior of Light has yet to explore. Players have obviously speculated that there could be icebound lands ripe for discovery, possibly housing lost civilizations, ancient artifacts, or terrifying eldritch horrors, of which we can come to the end of 7.3 with the mention of the Winterers and the Sundered Asians. So is this a civilization in a shrouded, blanketed ice field, basically, with lots of little islands, a civilization that is host to a myriad of secrets, that is actually hosting that of the Sundered Asians, but are remaining on this reflection, one or maybe more of them, and effectively they are waiting to pose their actual threat, which has something to do with the key to interdimensional travel that is now currently in the possession of the Warrior of Light. Will we be traversing on a boat north of Othard into the uncharted waters, which is all we really know about that? The imagination suddenly starts to race as you imagine what it could be like. Arctic tundra, perhaps? Ice fields, glaciers, maybe? Blindfrost means that perhaps there is something shrouded up there that no one has ever ventured to. Maybe it's just too cold, too, impossible to actually traverse. To the very north of Othard there is a mountain range, and beyond that mountain range lies a place called Bedalvalan Graf. This essentially is a section of land that is almost completely uncharted. It is a place that is split together into different little islands. There are ice flows between the area. There are, icebergs floating around from a northern flow from the Blindfrost. It is practically uncharted waters. It is said to be frigid, stormy, and plagued by very unpredictable currents, which means no one practically goes that way. It forms the maritime divide between Ilzabad and Othard naturally, and anyone traveling by sea from Garlemald towards the Far East would have to pass through or around this graph. So it's a natural defense for Othard and actually helped the people of the Far East from evading the Garlean Empire for so long, before of course they resorted to things such as airships. If we look at Aura, specifically Zayla lore, the treasure islands of Blindfrost are associated with the Zayla specifically and the Chaghagan Khan. This term roughly translates in our tongue to the Khan of Khans, i.e. the supreme leader of all of the Zayla tribes. Think of it then as the equivalent of Genghis Khan in real life. In the actual lore of the Zayla, and indeed their tradition, tribes gather together for the Danshig Nud Arm, which is a massive contest of strength, in which we actually saw in the Stormblood expansion. It covers strength, strategy, and high skill. It's held on the Azim Steppe to declare the winner, who is the Khagan, i.e. the supreme ruler of the steppe. So the Chaghagan Khan is the ruler of all rulers. Many years ago then, in Zayla lore, at one point in history, a particularly powerful Chaghagan Khan united all of the Zayla tribes in the world and led them in a sweeping conquest across all Othard. Their empire was said to span huge territories, but when he died, the empire collapsed back into its individual tribal factions, of which some of we know today, much like then the reflection of our real-life counterpart, Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire. It is said then that the Chaghagan Khan and his lieutenants hoarded massive amounts of wealth and artifacts from their various raids on different people and conquests, but they stashed them in hidden places at the far edges of the world in these treasure isles, and potentially a pretty advanced civilization at this point, especially to live in such harsh climates, and perhaps a way of keeping, untoward adventurers away by using some kind of relics or artifacts that the Chaghagan Khan actually found on the conquest of early Eorzean territories to actually protect and create a shield. If we think to Final Fantasy games in the past, to the far east of Final Fantasy VIII's world, there was a place called Estar. Estar was hidden by an invisible shield. It was pretty harsh to get there, so no one would go close to it, and it was invisible. It was just a wasteland, essentially, to everyone who witnessed upon it. A worthless place not worth investigating, but in reality there was an invisible shield that housed an entire civilization that had advanced way beyond anything else in the entire world of that game. Now, we've seen how things like that can exist with Solution 9, right? However, that is more related to the intercession of other shards. Perhaps then a similar thing has happened here, and there are obviously ties here with the storyline bringing on the plot point of the interdimensional travel key, which is now in the Warrior of Light's possession. So what could that mean for the next expansion? Like many of us, I expected a Mericidian adventure, which is pretty low-hanging fruit, like that's a pretty simple thing to go for, but I'm starting to lean more towards Blindfrost as an option, a new frontier expansion similar to Dawntrail, but this time in a cold, untamed land beyond Othard. So you can imagine frost-clad archipelagos filled with Zayla artifacts, eldritch ruins, various dangerous wildlife we've never seen before that have adapted to those harsh climes. The region could tie into Zayla cultural roots. We could even have a new Zayla main character along the way in the storyline. Allagan legacies, obviously, the Allagan Empire spread everywhere, so presumably that's also a thing. And maybe that could also include some cold or Allagan or ancient forgotten arts of fighting, which would grant us our new jobs or job related to the expansion. Now, will it be the entire expansion? Will it be a two-fronted feature? Will we have Mericidia and Blindfrost? Will this be something that, implies that it's just merely a few islands similar to Hingashi, right? Where we had, a few sections there and then we went back to Girabanya back and forth. And considering the closest people to Blindfrost, supposedly where it is, the Othardians, this could be an expansion of that storyline, something to push forward from the Far East. Maybe Hancock could be involved again and the people of Kugane. A glimpse into the world above might lean into Garlean ties. Maybe they tried to extend further north. You've got to imagine that Emmett Selk and the Garlean Empire probably had connections with those further north reaches, considering where Garlemald is situated in a northern cold climb, right? With us pushing so far west with Dawntrail and into Turalian landscapes, it would make sense then that we start to cover all of the other places we've never been to, including Erosidia to the southeast, but also to the north, right, with this Arctic North. What is up there? It is a very mysterious place, and I think that it's fair to say that we're going to be ticking off every single place that Emmett Selk has mentioned, and that was definitely intentional, and we'll probably have that narrative, you know, introduction, which a lot of people like, including myself. With Dawntrail, we had Emmett Selk's quote starting it off, which was a nice warm feeling. But anyway, in conclusion, the lore is hinting at the polar-like region beyond the area called Blindfrost. It could be figuratively or literally a frosted, you know, domed area, maybe somewhere you cannot even pass through. Maybe people have tried to pass through there. You know, we have Ketenram involved in the storyline now, a world-renowned adventurer who has a ship and has traversed across the world, basically, as we've seen with the Crescent Isles in the Occult Crescent. Maybe there's a continuation of his character as a main part of adventuring. And the idea that these are treasure islands, you know, ancient treasure, lots of lore to sort of fill in the blanks for a lot of the Zayla tribe, maybe an entire civilization of Zayla that are under the dominion of a sundered Ascian or multiples of them hiding up there. There could be a call to arms, something happens, rumors of something nasty happening to somebody disappearing, maybe something really bad happens and there's a call to arms that requires us to go north of Othard. You know, the seafarers' tales of what lurks beyond that of Blindfrost and no one ever returns sort of thing. You've got a good option there for what we had with the Siren Song Sea when we were coming over to Hingashi, that kind of lore. It practically writes itself, pretty similar to what we've experienced in the game before, but also opening up this cold, harsh, untamed place. And it's also a good reflection of we've just had a summer expansion. Maybe this is the winter expansion or the turning of the winter. That could be quite a good contrast and could be a lot darker toned than that of Dawntrail, which a lot of people have said that they want, you know, to get back into. Dawntrail was kind of like the start of a new adventure. You know, it's supposed to be kind of subtle. It's a getaway, basically, a vacation, as Yoshi P called it, and then it got darker to allude to a bigger storyline, and now we're getting closer to even greater storyline with these sundered Ascians who are hiding in different reflections, and perhaps even on our own reflection in the north. So there are three locations really that kind of we need to talk about when it comes to Blindfrost that can be seen on the map. Basically, we've got the Raya Peninsula, I think I pronounced that probably very wrong, the Dalvanal Graph, and we've got the Knowing Sea. So let's put this together. Basically, the Raya Peninsula is the northeastern edge of Othard, sticking out into the cold seas of the Blindfrost. It's a harsh, icy and unforgiving sort of area, body of water, and the peninsula is regularly battered by flows drifting down from the Blindfrost, making its coast dangerous to sail because there's massive icebergs around. The inhabitants, supposedly, it is populated, albeit sparsely, and there are Zayla nomads of the steppe occasionally roaming that far out, but there are no large cities or settlements that are mentioned. It is said that sea monsters are said to prowl in that area. There are many other rumors, including that of the icebergs that put off sailors from exploring. And it seems that many of the inhabitants of Eorzea would consider it a natural barrier against venturing further north, which seems to hold some truth, at least in superstition. With that kind of geography of that peninsula and the ice flows, it kind of makes it the gateway to any future expansion that ventures northward, so it would make sense that that's the direction that we would enter into whatever expansion would be in Blindfrost. And then finally, I think the Knowing Sea is also important to kind of talk about. This is the ocean that is east of Othard itself. This stretches between the continent and the islands further out that we know very little about, including presumably that further down southeast. It's a warmer and much calmer sort of landscape than Blindfrost, more like traditional sort of trade sea. Its name does imply that it's been well charted by sailors, so it's the border between the known land masses, charted waters, and that of the Dalvanal Graph, which, you know, is starting to get dangerous, and then obviously further north, the more dangerous those shipping routes become. It would also be quite poetic to start there with the calming seas before the literal storm. So yeah, there's a lot of theories, especially after 7.3. A lot of people have gone, Blindfrost, especially considering the term Winterers, which was referred to by Calyx, the Winterer Elders, which, basically Winterer means is resident of a cold plane. So yeah, that would make sense for Blindfrost. And it's the only place that we can really think of that's kind of that icy, that we have not got any lore about, basically, or at least none that has been written further enough to tell us what's on those treasure isles. But we'll have to wait and see. Let me know what your theories are below. I'm really excited to know what you think will happen in 8.0. Of course, we've got FanFest dates now, so it won't be too long in the future before we get to learn about this. And there's a good chance that we might see a shake-up in terms of expansion release if you look at recent murmurings. It might not be as far away as you think in terms of 2027, but we'll have to wait and see for more information. Anyway, let's keep the speculation rolling, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.